But I met Todd a few years ago as part of a bridge building exercise between our Osher Center and the MIT Media Lab. And our teams are very excited by our shared interests related to the intersection of music, movement, meditation, health, and technology. Todd's one of the most out-of-the-box artists, scholars, and innovators I've ever had a chance to meet, which resonates with the New York Times calling him a visionary. He's the Muriel Cooper Professor of Music and Media and Director of the Opera of the Future group at the MIT Media Lab. He's also a visiting professor of composition at the Royal Academy of Music in London. Again, just to mention a couple of his accolades. The title of Todd's and his group's multimedia panel is called, and this is good for all the sound people, Music, Movement, Meditation, and Machines. So please let me get out of the way and join me in welcoming Todd and his team.
Thank you so much, Peter. And what an exciting event. That last panel was just incredible. My sinus, I have good ears, I have terrible sinuses, so I want to get one of these Sonos right away. So we're going to do something a little bit different. As Peter said in that wonderful introduction, we work at the MIT Media Lab across the river. We work on music in all of its different forms. We want to give you a little background of the work we do, but we're actually presenting something completely new this evening. Something is new for us, something we haven't presented anywhere else. And we thought, given this venue and the adventurous spirit of the Osher Center, this was the right place to do that. The work that we're presenting comes directly out of conversations with Peter and with Andrew On over the last year and a half or so. And Peter came to us first to suggest the idea that Tai Chi, as you know, is usually done in silence. And he was wondering whether music, first of all, could enhance the Tai Chi experience of doing Tai Chi in a group, that maybe it would be a way to feel a kind of cohesion between people participating. And I'd always thought, I did Tai Chi myself a long while ago, but I always thought that having music that could both guide you in a Tai Chi session and also maybe interact and react to the way you were moving would be an augmentation for a personal Tai Chi session. So the idea of combining music with movement and with Tai Chi in particular, something like Tai Chi, was one inspiration for this work. A second was, we do a lot of high-end music in our group. I'll show you a couple of, we do operas, we work with, major performers, but we also really believe that music is in everybody and that everybody has the potential to participate in musical activities, and that if you participate, it's more powerful that way. And I kind of think the same thing about movement. I loved studying Tai Chi. I wish I had the time to learn it again, but we've been kind of wondering whether there are other forms of movement that might be inspired by the kind of benefits that Tai Chi suggests, but might be easier to learn or might even be improvisatory. Maybe something more like walking, physical movement that all of us do that we'll talk a little bit about. So a second inspiration for what we're talking about today is the idea of a movement practice that's beneficial, powerful, personal, but maybe more freeform than things that are available already. And the third is, we're at MIT because we believe that there are definitely some positive benefits with technology, even though one has to be very careful about negative benefits. And especially in music, technology enables people who aren't necessarily virtuosi to participate in music. It allows people to connect through music. It allows you to express preferences. There are a lot of wonderful things. And so the third inspiration today is how technology can enhance this experience of music and movement and meditation. So with that as a preface, let me give you a quick background about what we do, and then I'll introduce some of our team members who are going to share their work, which is background to a little performance that we're going to do at the end of the session, which is really a world premiere. It's a little world premiere, but nobody's ever heard or seen this before. So you're the first. So we've been inspired for a long time to find every possible way to bring music to the largest number of people to change people's lives. And that could be through enhancing creativity, building bonds of communication, and increasing health. And we believe that there's enormous potential that hasn't been tapped, and we'd like to tap some of that. One of the first things that we did when I got to the Media Lab was to think of how to extend the idea of an instrument. And in general, the idea is to have an instrument that understands how it's being played. So this is one of our first projects. You might write, this is a very young Yo-Yo Ma, was a project that we did when I was a bit younger too. But it's a cello that we built specially that measures everything about the way, let's see, we should have audio for that. That's a silent Yo-Yo Ma. There we go. So I'll start that again. So this cello measures everything that Yo-Yo does. It measures his sound. It measures where his fingers are on the fingerboard. It measures his gesture while he's playing. And all of that is used for the instrument to understand how he's trying to express himself through music. And it uses that information to take a solo instrument and turn it into a full orchestra or into a flute or a voice or a sound you've never heard before, all through his interpretation. And we develop those kinds of things for individual instruments, but we also do it on a fairly large scale. This is from one of our operas about a guy, the guy there with the tie, who his name is Simon Powers, and he wants to live forever. And he actually leaves the stage at the beginning of the opera and says, I'm going to download myself into the environment and I'll exist in another form. And so he goes down into a little booth with the orchestra, and through the entire performance, just like we did with Yo-Yo Ma, we measure his singing, but we also measure his movement while he's performing. We measure his gaze, we measure his muscle tension, his galvanic skin response to know how tense he is. All of that goes through a whole series of computers to measure what his emotional response is over the course of the piece. And we use that information just to basically make his presence felt on the stage. So even though you don't see him for most of the opera, the set, a chandelier, a chorus of robots all behave with his emotions. And so he is there on stage through our ability to measure his state during the piece. Being able to measure things like this opened our ideas to the idea that we really could make a difference in a health and medical context. So this is a project with a young man named Dan Elsey, who was born with cerebral palsy. Cannot speak, or really can't speak at all, has only limited control of his body, but we found that he was really interested in expressing himself through music. So we made a special head tracker and software that could measure his movements. He could use that with software that we developed to compose his own original music, which turned out to be really fantastic. And then we further adapted the head tracker so that he could perform his own music, and came with me to a TED conference, which is online. You can find it. And it wasn't just that Dan could make music with this software and these devices. It was that through music, you could see exactly who Dan was. You could understand what he was trying to express and simply see him as a person, which wasn't possible with any other form. We make devices. It was great to hear talk about vibration and all the power that has. This is a device called the Orb. Let me actually just get some water. You just open it. This is the Orb, which is designed to measure your singing voice, and it's actually built around a chanting experience where you chant one note, change the sound, and the vibration, the sound is transferred into this object that you hold in your hands, and you can feel exactly what the vibration is like inside your head. And you can feel the vibration, you can transfer it to an awareness of the vibrations inside your chest cavities up through your head, and learn how to modify those for all kinds of increasing of the meditation and focus. And it's quite, you can also hand the Orb to somebody in your family, for instance, and sing and have your son or daughter feel the vibrations of your voice. It's really, really pretty powerful. Alexandra Rieger, who's a PhD student in our group, who was planning to be here this evening, but is ill today, unfortunately, develops a whole range of devices for diagnosis and treatment through sound of all kinds of conditions. Alexandra has a background in neuroscience and in music and also in device design. So for her PhD thesis, one of the main things she's working on is a new category of devices called metamusical instruments. The idea is to combine the idea of playing an instrument with medical instrumentation for telehealth diagnosis and treatment. And so these devices involve replaceable little handles on the top of this device. This should have audio as well. And you can grip and move these in all kinds of different ways. There are a whole set of activities. Let me just go back so you can hear that again. Whole set of activities to practice, to refine your movement. This can be measured remotely, and your physician can diagnose all kinds of things about your progress. Alexandra designs lots of instruments. This is one that she designed for people with Alzheimer's disease, to have an interactive instrument, very simple to play, but compelling. And also, I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard about gamma frequencies. I don't have time to go into them in detail, but a lot of people are working with gamma right now. A few of my colleagues at MIT, particularly Lee Wei Tsai and Ed Boyden, discovered that the brain has gamma frequencies at 40 hertz, about the low E on a piano, low E of the double bass, running in your brain, actually very close to the surface of your brain. These frequencies have various functions, but one of the functions is that they control the performance of microglial cells, which basically are the vacuum cleaners in your brain that clean up after brain activity. So it looks like, it's not 100% understood, but it looks like if the gamma frequency is irregular or intermittent or non-existent or the wrong frequency, the microglial cells aren't stimulated and your brain can't clean up after itself. And that's one of the main reasons why plaque seems to develop. But our colleagues at MIT found that either with 40 hertz light or with 40 hertz audio, you can entrain the brain to create the 40 hertz signal again. And there are all kinds of clinical trials going on right now for exactly how that works. And we've been working on how to make those signals present in something you'd like to listen to. The actual 40 hertz signal, which I actually kind of like listening to, but most people don't want to listen to this for hours at a time, sounds like this. So it's that note, but it's also all the harmonics over it. You have to have specific harmonics. But what we've been doing is embedding this into pieces of music, actually designing pieces of music around it. So this is a piece that I wrote called Gammified for the Kronos String Quartet that has this frequency always there. And the quartet actually is kind of a set of variations on the harmonics of that low frequency, hopefully put in a package that is something that people want to listen to. So here's just a little bit of Gammified so you can hear the gamma frequency in a musical composition. So does your brain feel cleaner now? Is that, yeah, I think you need a little more than 30 seconds, but thought I'd give you a little taste. Lots more I'd like to tell you about. We don't have more time for my introduction, but the great soprano Renee Fleming, who a lot of you might know as a singer, has spent the last 10 years of her career really focusing on the idea that the arts in general and music in particular have incredible potential for improving health and well-being in many ways. She just published this edited book, Random House Viking. It's a fantastic collection. And we wrote one of the final chapters on how to create music specifically for mental and physical health. So if you want to learn more about our work, that's one good place to go. So let me introduce you to a few people in our group who are doing amazing work in these areas. First is Kimaya Lecamwasam, who has a background in music and neuroscience, is doing her PhD at MIT and is doing some of the most original work on music, emotion, and motion. So Kimmy?
Sorry, hello, great. Hi, my name is Kimaya. I'm a PhD student in Todd's group. And as Todd so kindly said, my background is in computational neuroscience and music. And at the Media Lab, my work focuses in on the intersections between music, emotion, and health. So there are several noted positive health benefits to music. And as we heard in the last panel, which was wonderful, the existence of the use of music to promote health and well-being is not new. It's been around for generations. And in fact, music therapy is a very well-established field and has shown notable benefits for clinical patients. And when we look at more lab-based experiments, we can see that music can improve cardiovascular, neuroendocrine, and psychological symptoms of human stress and anxiety, just to name a few. It also promotes connectivity and human connection, as well as emotion regulation. And we see this in a variety of prior work in the field, but I've also seen this in my own work, where we developed a personalized music-based interface to try and reduce some of the symptoms of stress and anxiety. And we measured this through collecting electrodermal activity and heart rate data, as well as GAD-7 scores and interview data. And we found that this type of intervention has really high potential to actually reduce both physiological and psychological symptoms of stress. Next slide. But it's important to note that while the majority of lab-based studies focus on individual listening experiences, there's also really remarkable potential of live music and large-scale concert experiences to promote health and well-being. Next slide, please. Especially when we consider the current mental health crisis that we're facing post-pandemic, it's really important to find other ways to support public health and well-being. And we really need to harness the potential of cultural institutions as public health partners. And work coming out of Carnegie Hall is a great example of this. They have several initiatives that fall into this category, but I'll touch on their well-being concerts and their Lullaby project, as these are projects that I'm currently working with them on. Their well-being concerts bring in populations to the hall to listen to an hour-long curated musical experience that's meant to boost well-being. And my role in this was to find a way to quantitatively measure this well-being impact. So inspired by the Measure Yourself medical profile, we developed a survey where we had people self-report their well-being goals. And then periodically, we measured the efficacy of this concert in bringing them towards their goals. And these goals were very diverse. They included wanting to feel less physical pain, but also connecting more deeply with family and friends. And we found that across the board, we had highly statistically significant results, which basically showed that experiences such as this have really high potential in boosting the well-being of populations. There are currently longitudinal studies in progress to look at the long-term effects of this kind of concert experience. And we're in the process of publishing our work, but it just serves as an initial marker that there is potential here. And with regards to the Lullaby project, expecting families are partnered with working musicians to compose lullabies for their children to promote caregiver emotion processing and emotion regulation, but also to boost childhood development and early childhood development. And there's a really great repository of work about the Lullaby project existing already, but future work will focus in on the impact of these experiences on postnatal depressive symptoms, as well as the positive impacts that these kinds of projects can have for hospital systems, both with reducing costs, but also encouraging families to actually attend their infant checkup appointments. Next slide, please. And when we think about the impact of music, emotion, and health, we really need to think about a lifelong impact. And one way that we are promoting this in the Opera of the Future group is through collaboration with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra and their Learning Center, where we've created this emotion zone where school-age children will be invited to come into the space and learn about music and how it relates to emotion and movement. And the way that we are hoping to convey this is through what we're calling an emotion X-ray, which is where a visitor will be encouraged to move and dance how they see fit to a song from the DSO archive, and we will average their movement speed, which will map to a tempo, then to an emotion category, and then to a color according to the literature. And we'll output this image that they can take home with them, both as a souvenir, but also hopefully as the start of a spark of interest in the way that these different fields connect to create what we're hoping is a lifelong interest in music, but as well as how it can positively impact our health.
This center in Dallas opens in March. So we're in the last stages now. If you're in Dallas, we'll tell you where to go and see it.
I also wanted to highlight Dr. Psyche Louis' lab and the work that's coming out of there in Northeastern, because it's really, really exciting, especially when it comes to thinking about the role of self-selection in music. Because if we think about applications of music for health, we can't just simply say, this is a relaxing song, this will work for everybody, because everybody's music taste and preference is really different. We have different levels of familiarity, of trauma, and of exposure. So for the sake of time, I'll sort of be brief about this, but Professor Louis' work is really exciting in that it shows that there are actual neural pathways that are activated when we listen to music that we like, that we're familiar with, and that we choose for ourselves. And that has really massive implications for the use of music-based interventions as an actual clinically validated intervention. Next slide, please. And I am an MIT PhD student, so I feel like I have to mention AI and generative AI, but it is a really important thing to consider when we think about the future of music for health, because there is a big push in the field to use generative music as a health intervention because it's really scalable, it's flexible, it can be highly personalizable, but it's also really important that we understand what it's doing. So a large part of my current research is actually studying generative music as compared to human composed music, looking at emotional resonance, physiological impact, psychological impact, and thinking about the ways that we can actually deploy these different kinds of music, if we even should, in clinical settings. Because there's so many ethical implications to generative music that could take up a whole talk, so I'll spare you. But when we think about the way these algorithms are trained, the data sets that are used, but also the ways that people are conditioned to think about AI and conditioned to actually use it, there's a whole world full of research opportunities there. So we've just wrapped our initial pilot studies looking at the emotional resonance as a comparison between AI generated and human composed music. And our next steps are to look into the physiology. And I'd be happy to talk more about this later, but I will leave you there. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kimmy. Now it's a pleasure to introduce Nina Masuelli, who's a master's student at the MIT Media Lab. And Nina has a strong background in music and in mechanical engineering, in software design as well, and especially in instrument design and performance. So she's going to show you some really unusual things.
Testing. Okay. Hi, I'm Nina. So as Todd mentioned, my research focuses on instrument design. Specifically, I enjoy looking at interfaces that really focus on using movement and gesture as input parameters, as well as playing with the idea of what an interface can look like, turning everyday objects into instruments, everything from pumpkins to peanut butter jars and even other instruments, as you can see here. Now with these systems, I like to think about different ways to create sound than what we could previously do with acoustic instruments, specifically focusing on what we can do with how we shape sound and what aspects of sound we choose to shape. So rather than discrete things such as pitch, harmony, and rhythm, and thinking about making music as a process of triggering notes, thinking about making music as a process of really shaping sound, how can we sculpt timbres and play with textures and the overall movement of music in ways that I think are very intuitively matched to how we move our bodies in space, as well as more accessible to people without necessarily a strong background in music, because it's something that is a much more intuitive process. So I think that there's a lot of power in connecting these types of things to how we move. For one, we can play with the idea of these metaphors of sound as a physical object. What happens when you hold on to and let go of something? What about a push and a pull? And speeding up and slowing down, what do all of these things sound like? And how can we really sonify the different quality of our movements? When it comes to mindfulness, I think that there's something really interesting here of when a system is so sensitive to every little movement that you make that draws awareness to your body and what you're doing in space. I think that there's something really wonderful here in being able to create interfaces that can help people tap into that pathway, that mind-body connection through music. Also having that kind of external source of something to interact with, that motivation of being able to make sound of that, I think is something that could be very nice for beginners, people who are not so used to really tapping into their movement. But I think that there's something really beautiful there. Next slide. So to talk about how some of this ties into work that I've done previously, I'll start with this project, Vocal Cords, which was an instrument that I developed with a previous researcher in our group, Max a Day. This is an instrument that is based on the use of stretch sensing rubber cords and joysticks to modify a singer's voice as they sing into a microphone through changing the harmonies, the timbre, and adding rhythmic effects to the voice. And this instrument was actually based on a lot of previous research about the connection between our voice and our hands and the intuition there, and how that can help singers find their voice and help empower people. I think this is a really beautiful project because the voice is such a vulnerable thing, and finding a way to externalize that, to get your hands on it and manipulate it, is very grounding. I think Max and I, playing this instrument, both had very similar kind of magical experiences of it suddenly taking us places we never expected to go with our voices. Like I was very out of practice as a singer the first time I sang with this, and it had me singing notes higher than I'd sang in years. Max as well in his performances was exploring these very vulnerable textures and noises that he'd never made with his voice. And there's something really beautiful about just having this type of interface to take you to places you didn't expect to go. The other project that I'd like to talk about is an opera that we worked on last year called Valis. This opera centers around themes of AI. So I guess my role in the production was working with Manaswi, another researcher in our group, to bring to stage this AI system that would be interacted with through an interface for live performance. So Manaswi designed this incredible system that pulled together all of this sound from the original opera for us to play with. And I built an interface. Can you go to the next slide? As you can see in the picture here, this is me on stage with the interface. It uses motion and touch input to interact with this AI sound world and explore that space in real time. So we have a little clip from that for you.
With audio. I can attest to the fact that Nina's movements were completely fluid and not herky-jerky like that in real life. So,
yeah, so I guess the video was jumping around a little bit, but the section of the performance that you see there shows me making these very large movements where I'm triggering these sounds. But there were other sections of the performance too that played with things such as these like little adjustments in space where I'm interacting with the system and kind of finding different sounds. And something that I think is really beautiful about an interface like this, and one of my favorite parts of the experience, is this idea of taking away a bit of that control that we normally expect with instruments. A lot of times we think of, like, if I were to play piano, I would expect, you know, I press this key, I'm going to get this note, I'll get this sound. But when you interact with an AI system, something like this, it's not necessarily like that. There's this removal of control where instead of not really thinking as much about what I'm doing, just working my way through a score, I have to listen to what the system gives me in response to my own movement and react to that. And that process, I think, really brought me in touch with myself as a performer and got me moving in ways that I wouldn't have expected to. And I think that that is something that I'd really like to explore more.
thanks so much. And the last of our little presentations before we play a little music for you. I'd like to introduce Treyden Chiaravalloti. Treyden's also a master's student at the Media Lab and has a background in interactive media design. Went to Harvard actually before, but I won't give away his whole story, but his original background is as a dancer actually. He went to Juilliard before he went to Harvard and before he went to MIT. So has a really interesting story to tell.
Yes, thank you. My name is Treyden, and I like to say that meditation really saved my life. It was very integrated into my integrated medicine practice now. But my family is quite traditional and religious, and they weren't as into meditation as I was. But one thing I could get them to do was go on walks with me. And so I've been thinking about this method of walking and been reading about it in the literature, and some amazing people like Kant, Thoreau, Nietzsche had practices of walking as a daily practice. And so these are some writings, the philosophy walking and walking from scores of people that are researching how can we codify ways to walk as a practice. And this is an example of a score of how to kind of dictate how somebody should walk. And as mentioned, my background is a performer. I've been a performer since I was very, very small. And this is me. And if we can go to the next slide. I've been thinking about since I was very young, it was a very common thing to use your cognitive theater. And William James, I mean, this idea is not very new. This idea of a representation of a movement can, to some degree, trigger the actual movement in our brains. If I continue, this has been studied in terms like mental rehearsal or visualization, and this is a practice from dancers to astronauts. When you actually think about, okay, what is the movements that I need to do to execute a specific task? It's a very common trait. It's been studied widely. If we go on, another thing that we use our cognitive theater for is imagining our future, right? Imagining what could be, what do we want to happen? And so in this vein, if you go forward, a colleague and I developed a system where we basically draw from your memories and give you suggestions of things to imagine for the future. And so kind of similar to a traditional journaling application, participants were journaling every night for a 2-week period. And each time they were given a suggestion of something to imagine about the next day. And if you go forward, this is under review for Kai, and we measured the standard depression metric, PHQ-8, to see if this intervention of imagining your future could affect your mental well-being and your mental health. And we did get statistically significant results. So if you move forward, so I've been thinking about this as one way to imagine, and nowadays I have this practice of walking the Appalachian Trail every year, or a portion of it, not all of it. And if you go forward, one thing that I found very present, similar to Emerson and Thoreau, is that when you walk, your mind wanders. It's like a kind of a common understanding, like your mind can drift. And so I've been thinking about how can we use tools to kind of guide how your mind wanders as you walk. Is there a goal to this? What is like kind of the healthy benefits of that? And so if you would indulge me, if you just close your eyes, can you imagine yourself on a beach right now? A beach, the sun is shining, the rays are coming down, they're touching your skin. If you're sitting down, if you're lying down. I think it's amazing how just that small prompt, we all are in another realm. And we're gonna be doing a performance in a minute. And when as I've said before, I was a dancer, and I'm going to be improvising in the performance. And one of the methods I use is this visualization technique. I put myself in a specific environment, and it could be even a physical constraint that I have, and I just exercise that kind of technique of embodying that experience. And so I'll be doing that in the performance. And so that's kind of where my research and thought is going currently. If you want to go to the next slide. So the system that I'm kind of testing and building is this wearable AI system to mediate your mind wandering as you walk, kind of using some of these techniques. Yes, I'm excited to show you the performance that we've been rehearsing around these ideas.
Do you want to say something about what's in your AI audio augmentation? Just
Oh yeah, so I'm playing with how responsive the mediated meditation should be. It has like a wearable camera, so it can kind of see your environment. Typically, people that walk can have a traditional route where they walk consistently every day. Some people walk a new route every day. So kind of like as an alternative to journaling, which I am not a great journaler, I do like to meditate, but walking is a different practice. And so how could this system be somewhat personalized to your specific goals or needs, whether it's mental well-being, it's positive visions of yourself, and how can it respond to the path that you're walking? So if it's seeing that path and kind of using prompts to do that, yeah, so that's kind of the basics of the system. And if you're a software engineer, we could talk and I can tell you how it works.
so as promised, we're going to show you a little something. You could think of this as a kind of first glimpse of what a different kind of practice might be. I'm going to play the cello. The cello is the instrument I grew up with. And actually, it's an instrument that I always have found incredibly wonderful to meditate with. You'll see when I mean, you know what the cello is, but it's about the size of your body. It vibrates and resonates. So when you play it, you can feel it all the way through your body. I can't think, maybe double bass is like that, but the cello is kind of more manageable. The length of time it takes to make a bow stroke is about the length. It's very easy to couple that with breathing, for instance, breathing in and breathing out. And just making the purest sound is something that one can spend a lot of time on. So in what we're going to play, it'll start with this idea of simple sound production on the cello. This sound will go into a system designed by Manaswi Mishra, who I'll let him describe it in a second. Manaswi is a PhD student at the Media Lab, and in my view is one of the really most creative people thinking about how AI can help with music performance and imagination. Amazing systems that he designed. You're going to see this brand new one. Do you want to say a little bit, Manaswi, about what everyone's going to hear?
Hello, everybody. I'm Manaswi. I'm a PhD student in the Media Lab at MIT, and I'm interested in generative AI as well. But I've always played music. I love musical instruments, and I'm struck between the difference of the object called music and the action of playing and performing music. And while many generative tools right now are focused on getting the object right, I'm very excited about the action, the benefits of playing, responding, reacting, making choices very quickly, which is what we do with musical instruments. Right now, we're going to demonstrate one such AI system. And what you will hear is the cello playing, Treyden moving, the AI system listening very subtly and responding. Everything that you hear is going to be in response to the sounds that the cello makes. So pay attention to that, and we can talk more further on what a musical instrument and what AI can be.